Awesome agenda today. I'm not going to be doing the webinar on my own. You'll be pleased to know. I've got some superstars with me who are going to help us talk about the browser challenge today. So we have a lot of customer interactions and support, and we see a lot of stuff going on. And so we're going to share some of the common things we see and our approach to overcoming those, specifically calling out Google Chrome, Firefox, and Microsoft Edge. They seem to be the most common enterprise browsers our customers are using. Um, and then on the back end of the webinar, we're also going to talk about browser extensions as well. So these often get overlooked, but there's a lot of meat on that bone. So we're going to pick that and share some of our knowledge around that as well. So I'm going to introduce our speakers, but the browser challenge is a little bit scary. Some of the high level things we see in support of listed here. So starting at the top, browsers are the most common targets for 0 days. So we have our own enterprise catalog that we curate. As soon as a vendor releases an update, we're on it, and we're releasing the update the same day or the same half day. We do rapid catalog releases, and we try to keep up with that as quickly as we can, because we know browsers are often targeted by the bad actors first, because everybody has a browser on their desktop. It's like a massive surface attack area for people to attack. So this is why we need to keep browsers up to date. Big risk. When it comes to keeping them up to date, a lot of the modern browsers now, especially the Chromium-based ones, have auto-update features. Some organizations decide to turn that off because they want complete control over the cadence of updates across their organization. And if they do that, how do you patch it? And even with auto-update turned on, it can break. So how do you catch those instances? You may have somebody using Edge version 77 still. When it comes to managing browsers, you'll often find across your fleet, you'll have 32-bit and 64-bit variants on the device, and now ARM variants out there as well that people are downloading and installing, so you have to manage those. They'll often come in different languages, so Firefox still doesn't have a multilingual version, so there's a different language flavor of Firefox you have to deploy across your estate. So for example, if you deploy Firefox in German, you have to patch Firefox in German. There's a specific binary that you need to deploy out. So we'll be covering that today. Install location is another big one that comes up. So are you installing your browsers in program files? Are you deploying the business version of your browser? Yes, good. Users can install the browser into their own user profile as well, which gives us a management challenge. So we're going to look into that today as well. Auto-updating, we kind of covered that with 0 day, really. Browsers can auto-update. Do you want that? If you do want it, is it working? Browser extension management is interesting. So we're going to tell you what we can help you with at Patch My PC. And we're going to go down a rabbit hole and just draw your attention to the idea that browser extensions can be very dangerous. So I hope you're managing them, and we'll give you some ideas of how you can do that and why you should do that. And then the other reason browsers, when you're looking at keeping them updated, you need to be able to report on, are they updated? So there's a lot of things to consider on browser management in your organization, and hopefully we'll give you some takeaway tips today. So we're going to focus on our 3 main browsers. I'm going to hand over to my esteemed colleagues, and we're going to start off, I think, with Melissa, who's going to be telling us how we can manage Edge in our enterprise. Are you there, Melissa?
I am. Thanks, Ben.
Awesome.
Hey, everybody. So there's a few things I wanted to kind of present today on Edge. The first one is deployment options. Second one is update options. And finally, configurations. So to start out, we all know Edge does come pre-installed on Windows operating systems, ever since Windows 10 and beyond. So one of the things I'm going to talk about is one of the most common issues we see in support on being able to manage updates with Edge from our catalog. So we'll circle back to that. But first, I wanted to do a very high-level overview of some of the different ways, if you needed to deploy Edge to your devices. So the first one is, and I'll start out with Intune, getting into the applications node. And I already have this deployed as an example. So real quick, you can deploy Edge directly from Intune. Just hit create and select the Microsoft Edge for Windows 10 and later. Another way that you can deploy Edge to your devices in Config Manager, if you go to the software library, Microsoft Edge Management, you can create a Microsoft Edge application as well. Both of these options are going to allow you to select between the dev, beta, and stable channels. And then finally, you can also leverage the Patch My PC catalog for base application installs, both across Config Manager and Intune. So I can show you that real quick in the catalog. So if I flip over to the publisher, Microsoft Edge, I do already have Microsoft Edge here selected and published into Config Manager. Same thing for Intune. You are able to find this product on the Intune side and in the cloud, both for base app and updates. And we're going to circle back to the updates here. So speaking of updates, we just went through some of the ways that you can deploy the base application for Microsoft Edge. The big thing is updating it. So it comes pre-installed. How do you keep it updated? There's a couple of ways, and one of the ways that I'm going to show you involves leveraging Patch My PC. So the first way is auto patch. So if I go into or Windows Update, either way, if we're going to leverage Intune, you can go into auto patch here, and you can actually leverage and select Microsoft Edge updates. So I can publish updates and get Microsoft Edge updated right out of box using my auto patch policies and groups. The second way is also the one that I want to focus on today a little bit more, since we do get this in support a lot, is leveraging updates from Patch My PC. So you'll actually see here, let me actually switch back to my other tenant. If I go to apps here, I do have the update for Microsoft Edge deployed out here. Now, a lot of times you'll deploy the update, you have that Edge install, it's already pre-installed on the device. I have a couple examples of that, and it'll show as not applicable. The reason for that is the inbox Edge, the Edge that's installed, is installed in a different location in the registry. Let me actually show you exactly what I'm talking about here. So I have a newly provisioned Windows 11 device, and you'll see Windows or Microsoft Edge is actually installed here. I can easily open it up and use it, but this is the built-in inbox Edge on the device. If I were to deploy the updates from Patch My PC, that's going to be the MSI Enterprise Edition of Microsoft Edge, and it will initially show as not applicable. So how do we get around that? Super easy. You can actually go to the cloud. Like I'm going to use the cloud actually. All you have to do is deploy the base application install. So if I go to my deployments here, I do already have Edge deployed out here. I'm going to show you what this process looks like. I'll go ahead and hit edit. I've selected the 64-bit MSI to deploy out here. Of course, I can disable the self-update. I can really edit this however I need to edit this for my particular installation. And then I can go to assignments. Now, the recommendation here would be to assign it out as a required app install. That way it will install on the device and it will convert any existing installations of Edge, whether that's a user install or the inbox pre-installed Edge, over to the MSI installation from Patch My PC's catalog. In this particular demo, I'm going to do an available install so I can show you this live on how this works. So I'll go ahead and cancel out. Now let's go into one of my lab devices. Again, I'll show you, we have an older version of Inbox Edge here. It's the older edition of Windows 10. So we have 124. Let's go ahead and convert this over to the MSI Enterprise installation here. Go ahead and install this. While that runs, we'll just watch this. It is going to convert the existing installation of Edge over. This is regardless of whether this happens to be somehow a user install based on the Microsoft documentation. The Edge installer will handle any existing installations of Edge, whether it's the built-in pre-installed version, whether there's a user install, it will convert over to your system-wide installation of Edge in whatever architecture that you do deploy. So that just, you don't have to worry about an uninstall. All you have to do is deploy that base application and you should be good to go. Now, moving forward, and you'll see this as this does install. Moving forward, a couple of notes on that. It will, once Edge is installed, you can then deploy the matching update. So in fact, while this is running, I can show you back into my Intune tenant or my cloud tenant. I have here an Edge update deployed. So you can do either one. You can maintain that required application assignment, or you can maintain, so let's delete this, or once you deploy the initial app the first time, if we go back and let's go ahead and do another deployment, you can deploy the updates as well. Both will function the same. Both will make sure that Edge will stay updated. So I'm going to do that 64-bit MSI. Let's do this updates. Here we go. And then we can deploy that out as an update-only package as well. So that's just something to note there. Let's go back into my device and let's see what has, now that's installed successfully. Let's take a look at this. Awesome. So you're seeing that registry entry just changed. It removed the Edge installation where it was. And now let's take a look at, there it is. Now we have the Enterprise Edition of Edge. Now I'm good to go. I can deploy my updates from Patch My PC. They'll show as applicable when new versions come out, and I will be able to update things fairly easily. Okay, so that's all about updates. We went over base application deployments. We went over managing your updates for Edge from Patch My PC's catalog, and we also went over a couple of other ways that you can update, including leveraging auto updates. Let's go into configuring Edge. So if I switch back to my Intune tenant here, I do have an example of some Edge configurations that you can do here. There's a couple of different ways. So of course you can use group policies. You can also use an initial preferences file. So I'm going to show you how that works with Patch My PC. And then also we'll circle back at the very end of this and we'll get into the settings catalog. So the settings catalog is a pretty powerful way. Natively in Intune, you can just pick any of the settings that you need to add, and you can just deploy those out and manage Edge that way. So first, actually, let's go into the cloud. And I do actually have an example of adding an initial preferences file with your Edge deployment. Same thing, I've done the 64-bit MSI. And then what I've done is add a post-install script. So if this is something that you choose to do, it is an option to configure your Edge installation. I'm going to go ahead and what I've done is created an initial preferences file that I've as a PowerShell script. So what this is going to do, my initial preferences are all listed here within this PowerShell script. I've added a couple of homepage, new tab information, a couple of extensions as well. But at the very bottom, what it's going to do is your initial preferences file actually has to be located in this location on the device. It's the same directory, that application directory that the msedge.exe will be running from as well. And you'll see that file there as well. So once this is all built, it'll actually create this initial preferences file in that directory. So that seems pretty straightforward. And all I've done is add that as a post-install script with my configurations. And same thing, I can assign this out. I've set this as available for now, but you could easily add this as a required application assignment just to make sure it gets to your devices without any user interaction required. Awesome. And now let's circle back into the settings. So in Intune, you can go to Devices, Configuration, and Policies. You see here, I already have one. I'm going to show you what I've created already, and then I'll show you some other policies and how to do that whole process of opening up the settings catalog and finding Edge-related settings. So in this policy, let's open this up. Let's go to the actual configuration settings. So the big one is restarting the browser and forcing a notification that is required for the user to restart the browser. So you can push updates all day, and the updates will apply, but the user will still need to go into the browser and restart the browser for the updates to finalize. So the first one here, the big one that I did want to point out is allowing a browser restart notification. And in this case, I've actually set it to required. So it's going to show as a required prompt, hey, you need to restart this browser. An update has been applied. Some other really high level stuff that I've put here that are pretty common. I've set a home page, and then I've also set new tab experience as well as allowing the home button on the toolbar. So those are a couple of very high level settings that I've applied here. And then I've also enabled the favorites bar, just some pretty simple ones there. So let's go ahead and cancel out of that. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to start a new one from scratch because let's create a new policy. That platform is going to be Windows 10 and later. And then settings catalog. Edge policy. And let's add some settings. The easiest way, there's a couple of different ways that I've searched through here, but you can just search Edge. And then you should see a list of all settings categories that are relating to Edge. So you can just kind of scroll through here. One of the ways that and you see extensions there, we'll get to that later, but one of the ways that I did find some of the settings that I put in my original profile is by just searching the actual setting itself. So I can set that home page. You can set it for Edge. And one thing I want to point out here is you're not only seeing Edge, but you're also seeing the Google Chrome settings. So you can set this up for Google Chrome. And the reason I point that out is Chris, who's going to come right after me, he is presenting on Edge. But before we kind of transition, that's pretty much everything I wanted to show you all regarding Edge. Moderators, are there any questions or anything that we can discuss real quick?
Just been keeping up in the chat. That's great. Great stuff, Melissa. Talk about how to keep things updated. Generally, people are saying they use auto update for some of the browsers, which is great. I'd also add on to that, if you do use auto update, there are policies and solutions that exist that will still help keep those browsers updated if auto update doesn't stop working. We've seen a couple of instances in the past where things like ASR rules in Defender actually throw Google Update out completely. So the Google Update mechanism gets flawed. We've got a blog on it on patchtuesday.com. And essentially we end up in the situation where the update is not dead. And those browsers are not updating. So even if you're auto updating, maybe have a fallback plan in case that doesn't work. You should certainly be reporting on those browser versions at the very least, just to make sure it's doing what it says on the tin.
Yeah, it's a good thing to call out because again, if the browser auto updates kind of with the user session, that user session is still technically running that previous version. So it's worth noting to get the user to restart their browser if possible. Using Melissa's solution for Edge, you can do the same thing for Chrome. And yeah, we'll dive into Chrome. So hopefully everyone can see my screen at this point. All right. There we go. So Google Chrome can be pretty straightforward, but then it can also be kind of a mess, right? On our supported products page, you'll notice that there's 3 different versions here. And really, it just depends on kind of what you installed in your environment and what's kind of out there for you. So, I have an Intune tenant here, nothing fancy. There's no version of Google Chrome here, so we'll go ahead and add something. Now, from our cloud portal, I'm gonna go ahead and do, if I can type it in there right. There we go. So I'm going to go ahead and deploy Google Chrome. Pretty straightforward here. 64-bit MSI. I actually have a pre-template for this. Browsers, just making it available for all my users, but then sending the update to all devices. So we'll go ahead and set that up. Again, nothing crazy here. If you've used our cloud portal, it's pretty straightforward. If you're using the publisher, one of the things I typically recommend for a lot of people is if you're enabling updates for things like Google Chrome and you don't know which version is out there, you can actually enable all of these here. So as updates, so we'll enable them here for Config Manager, and then even for Intune, if you're using the publisher, you can just go ahead and enable all of these for Intune updates, right? So it's really just kind of what's out in your environment. Now, our MSIs and our executables for the 64-bit will only apply to the device if that version was previously on that device. So again, with Intune here, got to give Intune a minute because Intune likes to take its time here. But eventually I should see both the application and the update for Google Chrome, right? So I have the update going to all devices, but because this is the 64-bit MSI, it will only apply to my device if it has that 64-bit MSI. So again, the easiest thing to do here is to also deploy updates kind of for all of them, right? Because who knows what's in the environment. You may have, one of your other IT technicians may have accidentally installed the 32-bit version everywhere. That happens. So, you can just create another deployment here for Google Chrome. That's the 32-bit version. But under my assignments, you may just want to add the assignment to update only on all devices, right? That way we're not advertising the 32-bit version to anybody, but we're also keeping it up to date. Again, you can use update rings. It's completely up to you on how you set this up. But with both of these set up, right, the 64-bit MSI, the 32-bit MSI, we'll keep both versions up to date in the environment for you. So again, I have both of them listed here, and our requirement scripts for both of these will just kind of determine which version is actually on the device. Right. So, while this one, the 64-bit MSI is being, marked as available for my users in the company portal, the updates will apply to the devices, again, if it's applicable for that specific device in that architecture. So interesting stuff there. Now, Google Chrome in and of itself, it can be kind of a mess. Again, where it's applicable on the device, I can actually run the requirement script here. So I'll go ahead and take this. I'm going to go ahead and take our requirement script here and run it on my device that has Google Chrome. Again, it has an older version here. So we'll go ahead and run this. It is a bit of a mess. Fun fact, we actually ran into the character limit of what you can put in Intune. So there's the signature here. But the interesting thing to note here, come on, there we go. The interesting thing to note here is that this version is applicable. So the package that we have here for this update for Google Chrome, this one will show applicable on my device because we are checking in the add remove programs table to determine which one is the correct update for this device. So again, if I were to do the same thing with the 32-bit version here, it would just come back as not applicable. So we're only going to apply updates, for that specific architecture on that specific device. We're not going to mix and match. However, something interesting you can do with Google Chrome, if for some reason, I have Google Chrome here. It's actually, the version prior to today. This Google Chrome actually updated yesterday, so everyone be sure to update your browsers. But the interesting thing to note here is that I currently have the 64-bit MSI installed on this device. So this is under the 64-bit node for your add remove programs table. And if I run the x86 install here for the update for this, this will actually install properly. And it'll exit with the exit code 0. And then it will actually move your registry entry into the 6432 node. So, or the WoW 6432 node. So if I take a look here, once this actually finishes up, it installed. So I can hit refresh here and we should, yep, this key is no longer, doesn't exist anymore. So again, this new MSI, just running the MSI over the top of the 64-bit one, actually moved it all the way down here into, let's see, uninstall. Oops, where am I? 6432, let's see, Microsoft Windows, and then current version, and uninstall. And it should be in here if I type in Chrome. Eventually we'll find it in here. Either way, it actually moved it and it worked with the 32-bit installer here. So something interesting to note there, you can swap back and forth. So if you mark like the 64-bit required on your devices, it will actually install over the top of the 32-bit version, converting everything to 64-bit. So, that may be a little bit helpful for you there. The one interesting thing here is even if I kind of swap these back and forth between 64-bit and 32-bit MSIs, the executable will fail. So if you mark this one as required on your device, it'll actually exit with the 1603 exit code. So this one should just fail. Yep, there it goes. So you can't install the exe 64-bit over the top of even the 32 or the 64-bit MSI. So it's really just a matter of kind of keeping the channels, keeping everything in the correct channel, making sure that things kind of go the way you want them to in the environment. Yeah, it can get kind of a mess, but one thing to call out here is user installs. So what tends to happen and what we see a lot in a lot of environments, and again, there are ways to control this, but there are not a lot of good ways to control this. I currently have a policy just, to allow my user here not to be able to install software. And if it prompts for this UAC, I can actually, so again, this is the downloaded Chrome setup. If I just hit no on that UAC prompt, it will actually let me install Google Chrome. So, this is kind of a thing for Chrome. Like they want you to use their browser, right? So they're just going to give it to you, whether or not you have, whether or not you have rights to your computer or not. So this isn't really that great. Yeah, again, there are ways to control this a little bit better than what I've done here, but we see this a lot in a lot of organizations where Google Chrome is going to sit here and install under the user profile instead of the machine profile. And then if that's the case, then our applicability scripts for the updates are not going to end up working here. And this is where, you may have Google Chrome that installed on somebody's device and under a specific user, and it's actually out of date because that user hasn't actually logged in for 3 months. Right. And then you're going to get Defender notifications about it being old and out of date. So again, if I refresh here, it does allow me to install Google Chrome. If I take a look here under my HKey current user, so that's this here, I can actually see, let's refresh this. There's Google Chrome installed under my user profile. So this becomes a bit of a challenge with a lot of organizations where Google Chrome actually installed under the user profile. So how do we keep this up to date, especially if, they haven't logged in 3 to 6 months. So that can be a bit of a challenge. One thing that we typically recommend is to just go ahead and run the machine-wide installer on the device. So I have it here. Go ahead and hit install here. This is just in the Software Center. Again, this is the latest version of Google Chrome as of today. So we'll go ahead and install this one. Now, once this actually installs, something interesting happens within the registry where it will actually remove it from the user profile, but it doesn't do it immediately. So what has to happen is the user actually has to log into the device and run Chrome in order for it to migrate everything into the or into the machine context. So again, what will likely happen here is I will have two Google Chromes in add remove programs. One is my machine-wide installer. One is the user profiles installer. So again, this is a bit of a problem, but Google Chrome actually did help us out a little bit here with, if I run Google Chrome here, what tends to happen is it should migrate everything from, okay, now it's no longer here under this current user, and it migrated all of my settings into the machine-wide installer. So then we can keep it up to date either with Patch My PC or allowing it to auto update. Yeah, so Google Chrome gets kind of wild. There are a lot of different things here where it can trip a lot of people up for which version is actually installed on my device. When it comes to Patch My PC, we don't really care other than as long as it's not the user context. You can just run the updates for Google Chrome either through Config Manager or through Intune, just to make sure that we're keeping these things up to date. Again, the user actually has to actually log in and run Google Chrome in order for it to auto update. So it is nice to have kind of the Patch My PC updates behind this, and because maybe they're out for a week and they don't run Google Chrome for a while. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. Google Chrome kind of is the Wild West, but even more of a Wild West is Firefox when it comes to all their shenanigans that they do and all their challenges that you have to go through. So yeah, are there any questions from the moderators? How are we feeling?
Some good questions rolling in. That's good stuff, Chris. One question that came up was the whole user has Chrome installed in the profile. What do we do then? But you gracefully demonstrated how you deploy the program files version, the system-wide version, and when the trick there is the user has to launch the browser and then the binary swap over. So if you're doing any kind of report, you may still pick up on your TPM tool like Defender. Those tools will often look at the binary on disk, so they'll go through all the profiles. They'll see there's a version of Chrome that's out of date, and it will flag it. Now that's not going to get updated until the user launches it. So there's some other remedial stuff there you might need to do. But I think like Melissa showed, when you're deploying updates through Patch My PC, you can handle that with pre and post scripts if you need to do any of that kind of remedial stuff. So it's really cool.
Yeah, and again, every environment's different. So, and how users install software and how admins install software, you may be kind of new to an environment and, have to untangle some spaghetti. It's okay. We got you covered.
Yeah, awesome. Is there anything else for Chrome? Did anybody see in the chat or the Q&A that's worthy to call out before we move on?
All right.
No, good. Awesome.
All right. Well, I'm going to jump in and cover how to manage Netscape using Intune. No, just kidding. Let's go on with Firefox now.
Wrong century, Michael.
Yeah. Or let's move on to the literal redheaded stepchild of this trio here. Yeah, to kind of continue on the conversation Chris mentioned about like user installs, you may notice like in the Patch My PC product too, if I go here to deploy Firefox, and this is going to be true for Chrome and Edge as well, as we don't have a user option here for the context. And that goes back to what Chris showed about depending on the user and if they're a local admin on the machine and they launch that process, it's going to install in either the system context or the user context. So if we don't know this beforehand, that's what makes it difficult for us to do detection, because if we were to run the user one and they are local or not, I'm sure some people are assuming, well, we could check beforehand or maybe, but then it comes to that point of like, well, maybe they were a local admin at one point, now they're no longer a local admin. So it's difficult, and that's why we don't have that current option. And to what Ben mentioned too, if you do want to replace these, ideally the best way to do it is somehow create a group of devices with that user-based installs and then run the system-wide. Although Firefox makes it a little difficult too, because you can actually end up with 2 versions of Firefox, and it will launch both of them. It's not quite as seamless as Chrome in updating that. So yeah, it's something we've looked into, and hopefully, depending if things can change in the way things work, we can support in the future. But to keep jumping in with Firefox here, kind of the first thing with Firefox is they do have two support channels here. So they do have the rapid release, which is their normal like consumer version that most people are going to have. And then they also have their ESR version, which is very popular amongst our customers too, and kind of big orgs because it provides a more stable release of Firefox. And so this is a popular one to deploy. It's supported for a year, and that's kind of the big important thing for most organizations. If you jump in here, you can kind of read the release cycle here. A big thing with ESR is there is a period of time where there's 2 versions of it as they overlap. So you have the older one and then the newer one that's coming in. They overlap for a period of time as they start to transition. So a frequent question we'll get with this is, why do we not have the newer version in there? We do actually have a KB article on this that we'll have in the resources, basically explaining why we do this. So for us and our customers, an important thing is, stability. And so we're going to keep that a lower version in the catalog until Firefox promotes that to be the new ESR version that's only available. And so if you go into their docs as well, they do have a release calendar here. So you'll see here for 2025. For now, they're going to have 2 versions, and because they're actually extending support for version 1.15, and that's for machines that are on Windows 7 and 8.1, which, come on guys, get your machines updated. Let's get off this version. Yeah, that one's going to go away in Q1 of next year. And so if we scroll down here, we can actually see the past releases, and you can kind of see how this works. Basically, at some point, we have 128 that goes, and then eventually the 140 gets promoted up. So I'm sure a lot of you saw in July, basically your Firefox ESRs were upgraded if you were using Patch My PC. So that's pretty much why there. Another thing to note too, though, is if you do have auto updates on for ESR on your browsers, it will automatically update from the major versions as soon as those get promoted too. So always keep an eye out for that too. And then, yeah, jumping back into the catalog, like I mentioned prior, when you go to deploy Firefox here, you do have the option in the app catalog for both of those versions here. So in the app catalog, it's nice and tidy. You just have the 2 products, the normal and the ESR. For a lot of you that are still using the publisher, if we search for Mozilla here and expand this, you're going to have 96 options here to select for Firefox, because you're going to have all the different variants that we support. Something to note too with upgrading ESR, if I go over the client here. So if we actually installing the rapid release over the ESR is a pretty smooth transition. If I just basically go through an install here of doing the ESR version, and I launch this, we can see here I've got the ESR installed. And that's already automatically updating for us already. And so I'm actually going to let that finish here. But then, yeah, so if you're trying to replace this, it's much easier to go from ESR over to the normal build here. So I've got ESR installed. I'll let the rapid release one install here. It's going to perform an upgrade for us, and it's a pretty smooth transition this way. And so we can open up, and now our version has just been replaced altogether with this now. If you go the opposite way, though, that's where you can run into some issues with your profile. So with the profile being created with the rapid release and you go to do an ESR, you may run into an issue, and you'll actually see a prompt when you go to launch it. It's going to say that your profile was created with the older version. You may need to swap that out. So something to keep in mind if you're trying to downgrade basically to the ESR, because the ESR is always going to be a lower version. Another thing that we deal with commonly is language packs. People ask about with Firefox. I'll jump over to that right now. So as I mentioned prior, Firefox has over 90 different language installers. There is not an MUI installer for Firefox. And so at Patch My PC, we actually support 24 different languages right now in the catalog, which we have to give it up to our app team for that, because it's not just 24 different installers. It's x64, x86 for rapid release, as well as ESR. So it's 96 installers that we're tracking for that. And now we just started adding ARM. If I go over to here and search for Firefox on this tenant here, and I go to deploy, we're pretty soon, currently in private preview, we're going to have ARM, which is a whole nother 24 set on there. So we're going to have 120 different installers we're going to be tracking here just for Firefox for 24 languages. So if you do need an additional language, definitely put it up on our ideas page. The team will get it added if needed. Yeah, Firefox does not make language packs easy. If I jump back over here, so you can actually include different language packs if you are deploying a certain one. So if you deploy the EN/US version and you need to have some additional language packs, they do have an option to do that. You can download these packs, include them in your package, and then deploy it that way. We do have this KB article on a way you can do this. This will be in the resources as well. So we actually have this script you can use as a pre-script, and it's over on our GitHub here. And so what you do, you'll see here, I've got these language pack files. They come as these XPI files here. So you download these files, and then you download that script off our GitHub here. And I'm going to use the publisher as an example of how you can do this. So I'm going to do the ESR in US version here. If I right click on here and do manage pre-post scripts, you're going to see here what I can do is I add all these language files as additional files here. And then I have that PowerShell script up here added as a postscript, because I want this to occur after the installation happens. And so if I actually jump over to this other machine where I've got this ready to get installed, I can hit install here. And basically I have this package already built out this way. And so what this is going to do, install Firefox ESR in US, but then I'm going to have those language packs already available for it. Something to note too, though, is Mozilla does make these language packs unique to each version of Firefox. So if you kind of have to keep up on the language packs on those additional files as each new version comes out. So it's kind of annoying because you have to constantly do that as well. It kind of makes the automation not as great, but it has at least an option. So I have Firefox here. If I go ahead and launch this now, and if I hop over to settings here, and I go to extensions and themes, you'll see here now I have this languages popping up. And so you'll see those 4 language files have now been loaded automatically for me here. And if I go back to settings and we scroll down to language area here, you'll see in language, I now have all these versions here available to me. And so you can go in here and automatically add these yourself if you want, but this is just a way to kind of make it a little easier for your users to switch languages depending on which one you're using to install. So yeah, always a handy feature there for Firefox. They don't make this easy, that's for sure. Yeah, and so let's move on to basically how you can kind of customize Firefox. So one thing to do is basically disabling auto updates. We've been talking about this quite a bit. One way this occurs with Firefox that you can do using Patch My PC is to disable the auto updater, and that's just applying the policy registry key here to stop that. So right now, if I open up Firefox on this machine and I go over to setting the about Firefox, you'll see here we have the ability to auto update. So I have this registry key already set here, and I can run this. And we'll see in the background here, under local machine policies, Mozilla, and then Firefox. If I go over up here, there's this key here, disable auto update. This is essentially just the registry key that Firefox is looking for to disable auto updates. And so now if I go and actually launch Firefox, and we do the whole about here, we'll now see updates have been disabled by your organization. So at the very least, this is the key that Firefox is looking for to disable the auto updates there. And that's how you can kind of get that going. Another Another way you can customize Firefox is using their policies.json file. And so if I actually come over here, I'll include this in the resources as well, but they have a policy.json file. And so this is a file that you can put in the installation directory, whether it's in the user or the system-wide one. And you can apply policies this way. And so the nice thing about the policies.json is it is cross-platform compatible. So if you build one of these out for certain settings, you can use the same file across your Macs as well as Windows too, if you're deploying it that way. And so if you actually go into the policies, they do have this page, this really nice page. So you can actually search for certain things here and just kind of figure out like what policies you need to apply for certain situations. So if we hop over to this other machine, I have some examples here. So for this one here, kind of we just talked about the auto update. You can actually just add this auto update policies.json into the installation directory. And so as I mentioned, I have Firefox installed here. And the install directory here is on the system wide. So we're in the program files, Mozilla Firefox. So where this file needs to be is in a subfolder here. So if we actually go to create that subfolder, it's called distribution. Almost forgot how to spell that for a second. And so we're going to plop this file here. So as an example for this one here, let's open Firefox and just kind of show in the about here. Basically, we have the ability to check for updates. So if I actually grab this disable updates policies.json, drop that in here, and I go over to Firefox now and reopen it, we can actually go do the same thing, and we'll see here that it didn't work because I probably opened it too fast. Let's see and try that again. One more time. Come on. Live demo. And it's not working for me right now. All right. Cool. Let's try the other one here. Maybe I got something written wrong in here. Let's try the homepage one.
That's what happens on technical demos, man.
Yeah.
Every time.
Am I spelling distribution right? Maybe that's my problem. Oh, I had it right. All right. Let's try this. Okay, there we go. So now you can see the homepage was launched and Patch My PC was set to the homepage here to open. So that one worked. So to kind of figure out how, basically what policies are applying here, they actually do have one of their about pages here. So these are pretty popular for browsers, right? So you could do about policies and you can actually see these are the policies being applied. So this is kind of a nice way to see if your JSON is actually working that way. Yeah, and then one of the last ways to customize Firefox is through group policy, just like we normally do. Firefox does provide ADMX templates where you can go in, add these, and if we zoom in here, and I don't have zoom in on this machine, you can see here under administrative templates, I've uploaded these. It'll be under Mozilla and then Firefox, because I'm pretty sure they still have some for Thunderbird as well. So within Firefox here, you can come in here and do things like do that disable update through a policy here, as well as customize like the Firefox homepage as well, items like that. So if we go hop over to this machine, we'll see here I've got some of these applied. It's in the same section, policies, Mozilla Firefox, and we'll see we've got some different policies here where I've set the Firefox home, which is different from the home page, which is the default launch page. So if I actually launch Firefox on this machine now. Oh, and actually, it would help if we actually had it installed, right? Let me do that real quick. And with Intune as well, the ADMX templates, right? You can upload these into Intune and then apply these through administrative templates as well. So although I'm demonstrating this through group policy, kind of on-prem, go on-prem, right? And then you can still do it through Intune as well. So the same principles apply for that too. All right, yeah, so now if I launch Firefox here, and I just skip through the setup, right? Because Edge isn't just the only one that bugs you every time you open it to add new features or what's new. We could see here my Firefox homepage is set to only do the search bar. And then I think I've got like a home button here which is set to portal.patchmypc.com. So group policy, always a great way to kind of customize and make sure that you're maintaining the same settings across your organization here. Yeah, but for the most part, that's Firefox and kind of the big things that we go through and support. And then as well as, like I mentioned at the very top of when I spoke, was the user-based stuff. Some good suggestions I saw in the chat, which is like using either collections within a config manager to run configuration items to find those devices with user installs and stuff like that. So definitely give those a try to try and get those user installs converted over. But yeah, any other questions on Firefox? Like I said, the literal redheaded stepchild of the trio here.
That's some great learning there, Michael. I think, yeah, the big one for Firefox is the language, different variant for each language.
Yeah.
I think so. If anybody knows which door we can lock on to gently persuade somebody with lots of candy, how to get an MUI version of Firefox, that'd be awesome.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to manage.
Yeah, and actually one other thing I'll touch on is, I don't know if I saw it in the chat, but Firefox technically does have MSI installers. I'll just note that the reason we don't have them in our catalog is because the MSI is just the exe wrapped in the MSI. So for us to also track the MSIs along with that, really, it doesn't give too much value for us because it's basically the same installer anyway. And as I mentioned, we're already going to track 120 different installers doing the MSIs as well, just not really a great value for our catalog. So
I wonder if anybody is deploying ESR in anger. We do see it from time to time in support. I'm just curious. Show of hands, who's deploying ESR? Firefox. Not even one hand.
Yeah, a couple.
Oh, let's have a moment. Oh, there's one. 10-second silence for that lone admin.
yeah. Yeah, and I think we're going on to extensions now, right, Ben?
Yeah, let's go extensions. Awesome stuff, Michael. Thank you.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really good information shared there, like how to manage browsers, the different variants that are out there, how to support them. Really rich information. So the webinar's going to be posted, and we'll put time links in. Hopefully, we've got Tony the Magician who'll hopefully do that, so you can easily jump to the point for the browser you're interested in. The final part of the webinar, we just wanted to talk about browser extensions. So these often get overlooked, and yeah, let's give them a little bit of love, because you might walk away and decide that you're going to go straight into Intune and create some policy. So this isn't meant to be like the scary session, but maybe a little bit. So like gentle intro into what an extension is in a browser. Effectively, think of them as mini apps, because that's what they are. Yeah. It's an add-on to a browser that enables you to use the browser more efficiently. It's like a feature or a function. If you use PowerShell, it's like a module. It's just a side-loaded thing that does some cool stuff. And these have been around for a while. And there's a link on the screen. I was researching like how many extensions are there in Chrome, and 138,000. Yeah, that's incredible. So if your users have browsers, I mean, let's lay out some simple terms here. If you're using browsers, and you are, and you're not managing browser extensions, your users can go off and download 138,000 applications into the browser effectively. So it needs some attention. So talking a little bit about like, okay, we know an extension is an app, but how does it represent itself in the browser on the user's desktop? So the best way to find these, to understand what's going on, is to look at some files in the user profile. And so I'm going to focus on Chromium-based browsers and Firefox when I talk about extensions, but be acutely aware that all browsers, like Brave, I think Brave and Opera, you can do extensions as well. I haven't aggressively researched those. But at the end of this session, think about, how do I manage browser extensions, and what browsers could my users install in their profile? How do I preempt that? Because I need to manage the extensions in those unknowns. So now you're talking like wild admin stuff. Anyway, back to let's focus, Ben. So in the user's profile for a Chromium-based browser, if you look in the app data local folder for Chromium-based browsers. There's a user data folder, and then there's either a default folder for the default user profile, or there's a profile numerical value if there's additional profiles been added in. So there's a unique preferences file in each of those profiles. For Firefox, the file is called an extensions file. It's essentially just a JSON body. And what this JSON represents is a manifest of all the extensions. I mean, the preferences file lists more than just extensions. But it shows you what extensions are installed, and more importantly, what permissions do they have. Yeah. And a bit more about the anatomy of an extension before we move on, because this is important to remember. Extensions will have an extension ID. And so in that URL at the bottom of the screen, I've highlighted it in blue. This is the extension ID for an extension in Microsoft Edge. It's a dark reader extension. It's just one I pulled at random. So if he's going to go off and say, well, okay, this preferences file sounds quite interesting. Take a screenshot of this and chuck it in your favorite GPT thing, and it'll do the text conversion for you. You can do some basic PowerShell, and you can look in. Oh, I was trying to highlight a PowerPoint deck then. If you use the set a variable and say, I'm going to go and search in the user's profile folder, and I'm going to look for all the profiles in their browser profile, and I'm going to look for a file called preferences. I'm then going to iterate through that preferences file. I'm going to look through the manifest for the extensions and just pull some interesting information out. So basic stuff, throws it in a table. And so this is now highlighting to me all the extensions in this one user profile. So it's showing me the extension ID and the name of the extension and the version, and importantly, the APIs or the capabilities of this particular extension. So what does it want to do? You know, does it want to harvest all my passwords or do something quite benign like look at icons? So we'll talk about more about permissions in just a second. So I'm going to focus on permissions because they are important. And extensions can be backdoors, and they're often overlooked. So if we look at this example here, back in 2024, somebody did compromise the credentials of an employee for a data security company. This is just one example. I could have pulled this from many. Once they were able to get that user's credentials, they had access to be able to update that company's extension in the Chrome store. They then deployed some malicious code to that extension. The extension auto-updated on everybody's devices who had the extension installed. And suddenly, through this kind of supply chain attack, the users who previously trusted this extension, and we'll talk about how do you trust a particular extension over another, suddenly found themselves that they've now got this extension installed in the browser that's harvesting data. You know, the timing of this particular attack was interesting. So they chose to do it over a quiet period, and you know, this is quite common. People didn't really notice what was going on, and by the time they did, hey, we've got some stuff here like your passwords or your tokens and things like that. So you have to, what I'm trying to say is you have to look at extensions through that security lens because they are important. When you go to install an extension, it will tell you what permissions it's going to ask for. So you can see these when you go to the store. And we'll go through what these different extensions mean. We're not going to go through every single API permission because we'd be here for another 24 years. But these are things to keep an eye out for because they are important. Your users may artificially trust an extension based on the number of installs it has, you know, and I'm going to hold my hand up to this. Before I researched extensions, I would go to the store, search for an extension. 2 million people have downloaded this, so it must be safe, right? Like, do not rest on your laurels on that premise because it is not safe by default. A high user count when you're talking about browser extensions often means it's a high value target for somebody to attack and compromise because they know it's widespread and it increases the attack surface area and payload of what that malicious actor is trying to do. Often as well, you'll get people who will write a really cool extension. It gets really popular. A third party looks at the popularity of that extension and decides, hey, I want a piece of that cake. And so they'll go and offer Timmy, who's developed this extension in his bedroom, like a load of money Timmy sells it to them. They go and start changing API permissions and things to do other stuff. Like maybe they want to harvest some details from people. And suddenly, you've got an extension that you thought you trusted, but now it's auto updated and it's now got new permissions and it can do other stuff. So let's have a look at like what good and bad permissions are for an extension. And there's some links here on the bottom, which I found during my research. And you can look at how the different API permissions are listed for Edge and Chromium and Firefox. The Mozilla page actually at the bottom, that bottom link is really useful because it shows you the different API permissions across the different browsers. So it's really quite an interesting one to look at. Some permissions are quite benign, and so we'd consider them low risk. Some permissions are quite high, some API permissions. And when we're looking at API permissions, it's not just the API permission that we need to look at. I mean, it's important. So if there's an API that's going to say, I'm going to look at all URLs on the active tab that you're browsing. So your extension's sitting there in the toolbar. It's looking at everything you're doing on the active tab. Okay, that's quite a critical permission that it's got in my eyes. Beside the permission, beside the API permission, you also need to look at the host permission as well that the API is going to ask for. So the API is going to ask for a specific permission to do something, but there's then a separate host permission. There's also in the manifest file that tells the API, what it can and can't do. And so this is what we're going to look at next. So when we talk about those host permissions, a host permission is basically where can the extension access? And when we talk about host, we're talking about the browser itself. And so a really high permission that an extension could request of the host is something like that pattern you see there, https://*/*, which basically means all HTTPS traffic. So those top three are just some of the more common ones, like overly permissive host permission, in my opinion. But there are valid reasons why extensions request those, and we'll talk about that. And then you've got the API permission itself that we see in the manifest. What are the capabilities of the extension? It's the best way to think of that. And so that might look something like web request, just to monitor all the network traffic. There might be a scripting API as part of that extension that injects code into pages. When you combine a highly permissive API permission and a highly permissive host permission, you then should really stop to think, what is this extension doing? And what is the risk for me allowing my users to install this in my organization? So if you take an example here, web request API permission plus the https://*/*, try saying that after 3 coffees. Effectively, what the extension can do there is intercept all HTTPS traffic, so maybe it's going to be able to get to your banking information, the passwords you're putting in. A great example of this is like a password manager. A password manager will often need the ability to read the forms that you're accessing, copy passwords from the extension to the form and back again, so it might seem like you've got a very trustworthy extension doing stuff like a password manager. And I'm not saying it's not trustworthy, but it has very high permissions on what it can see in that browser session. So in this example here, this is an example for Bitwarden Password Manager. I installed this in the lab, and I defined myself a critical risk for API and host. So this is me saying in my lab, these are critical permissions. I should really understand what's going on here. I have not found a universal, this permission is really bad, this host permission is really bad, these two combined are awful, never trust this extension. I don't think there's a source of truth. It's kind of based on education, gut feeling, and research when you start looking at the extensions you're deploying. So I kind of came up with this model, and this is not me saying to you, this is how you should classify your extension permissions. This is just a quick stab at it, but you should be doing something similar in your organization, identifying which API permissions you would class as critical, maybe which ones are high, which ones are medium, and which ones are low. So I've just shared that there. Again, alongside that exercise, you should also be looking at the host permission too. What is the extension requesting of the host or the browser? So I would personally, and this is not me saying, this is me showing what I'm considering. I would consider critical as in if it's trying to access everything, then why is it doing it? I would put these in a high category. So if this extension is trying to access these specific domains, I might consider that a high risk. So I'd probably want to look at what's going on there as well. When you combine the API permission risk and the host permission risk, when you look at extensions, I haven't put this on the Patch My PC GitHub repo yet because I literally just finished it before the webinar. But there's a link there to my private GitHub repo with a script that will look through all the permissions in a user's profile, pull them out, and classify them based on my risk assessment. So absolutely do not use this script today and put it into your enterprise organization and say, Ben said this is a critical high risk for me. I'm not saying that. You have to do your own classification of this risk. And hopefully that's obvious when you look at the comments at the beginning of the script. But pretty cool stuff. If you're not doing anything with browser extensions, just run this script on your own personal machine. No, don't. I'm going to harvest all your data. I'm not. It's a really useful script just to understand what extensions you have and what permissions they're requesting. So, yeah. Yeah. Oh, bless you. Yeah, I think we did, yeah. Cool. So a script is one way of doing it. Your TVM tools should be able to tell you this as well. I know Defender Vulnerability Management, there's an add-on there that can look at browser extension. Microsoft had their own classification of browser extension risk as well. And other TVM tools do a flavor of that as well for browser extensions. Ideally, if I still had my consultant hat on, I would be advising my customers, you really should get on top of extension management. In my opinion, you should be deploying policies from Intune to block extensions, even for browsers you're not managing. Because as I think both Chris and Michael explained, users can install browsers in their user profile. Yeah, so there's nothing, you're sitting back with your coffee or your can of Coke thinking I'm safe because I've got Edge in my environment. And then somebody, bang, comes along and puts Firefox in the user profile and you're not managing it. Hey, happy extensions. Let's bring them all in. So here's some examples of how you can deploy policy from Intune to try and block some of that stuff. So in this example here for this Edge policy, this is in the settings catalog, so it's like super easy. My top 3 policy settings are block extensions from being sideloaded. So people can add extensions to the browser just by modifying a registry entry or by editing a JSON file. So you can set policy to prevent that. My other default position, so position 2, is just block all extensions. Then you're going to get some grumpy users. I don't do this today. Research what extensions you have and understand the impact of doing so. And then I would whitelist. I would then allow specific extensions to be installed inside my corporate browsers. So in this example here, here's some extension IDs for some popular password managers. Again, I'm not saying these password managers are safe to deploy. It's just an example of how to use an extension ID in a policy. What that looks like when the client consumes that policy, you can go to the browser and you can look at Edge policy in the address bar. It should show you those policies enforced. And if you then try to install an extension that's not on the whitelist, it's not going to allow you to do it. And this is an example of how Edge will moan about that to your end users. There are other policy settings in Intune that allow you to silently install extensions on your user's behalf if you want to force extensions out as well, but we didn't cover that. Now, very quick call out. When we're talking about extension IDs, they're not consistent across Chromium browsers either. Hey, here's the fun. So an extension ID here for Graph X-Ray in Edge is different to the extension ID in Chrome for Graph X-Ray. Go figure. To make our lives difficult. So don't copy and paste the extension IDs from your Edge policy into your Chrome policy in Intune, because it's not going to work. So another example of how you can use Intune settings catalog for Chrome. So Intune natively supports Chrome ADMX. So again, this is dead easy. it's same policy settings, of block extensions from being sideloaded, block all extensions using the wildcard, and then allow specific extensions. So there's an example there if you want to allow GraphXray. GraphXray requires a lot of permissions, so I'm not suggesting you go to install it. So for Chrome, that experience looks like this. If you've deployed the policy and you try to install an extension that is not permitted, it will tell you. So it's quite friendly. Firefox. Not so easy to deploy a policy for. Hey, no surprises. I mean, you can do it. So here's how you do it. You can't use the settings catalog. So you have to go and download the ADMX templates. So Michael was talking about that earlier. So there's the URL. Go and download a zip. You have to sideload these zips into Intune. So if you go to devices and configuration, you can import ADMX. You have to import the Mozilla ADMX first and then the Firefox ADMX. You won't remember that, and you're just going to go and try to do the Firefox one anyway, and then it will fail. And then you'll think, oh, I remember now. Ben told me to do the Mozilla one first. Once you've imported those and you get the green tick, you can then go and create a configuration profile, and you want to make sure that you choose import administrative templates preview. Now, before we show you what you need to configure in that device configuration profile, you need to get some information to populate it with. And this is where it gets a bit more complex with Firefox. So my advice is, if there's specific extensions you want to allow, just spin up a sandbox, fire up Firefox browser, go and install them, and then have a look at the extensions file in that user profile. And what you're going to want to get is at the very top, I haven't highlighted it, but you've got the ID at the very top. So make a note of that. And then also you're going to need to know the URL for the extension. If you look in that schema, there's an element called source URL. And you're going to need a slug basically. So for Bitwarden, the slug is bitwarden-password-manager. And the URL at the bottom is the kind of format we're going to need. We're going to need that full first bit, latest, / bitwarden-password-manager / latest.xpi. That format doesn't change, but the slug is unique for each extension. So once we've got the ID and the extension, we can then go and build a JSON file. So I told you Firefox wasn't simple. So here's an example in the lab. We've got here, for my first entry, I'm going to use a wildcard, and I'm going to set installation mode to blocked. And the blocked install message is, don't install extensions, they're dangerous. Or you can put any message in here you want. This is what's going to be shown in the browser if the user tries to install an extension that you haven't approved. I'm then going to explicitly allow, using the extension ID, installation mode allowed for this specific extension. So I've got one password here and Bitwarden as an example. Once I've got my nice pretty JSON, I have to compress it into a single line JSON. And I have to compress it because there's a setting in the configuration profile in Intune now called extension management JSON on one line. And you simply paste that compressed JSON into that field and press OK. And that's the policy that's going to be deployed to your endpoint. When the user tries to go into Firefox to add an extension, they're going to be told, no, we haven't allowed you to do that. It's pretty cool stuff. So I've only shown you Edge, Chrome, Firefox. You should be questioning, how do I block extensions for Brave? How do I block extensions for Opera? And all those other, So hopefully that's given you a, man, we better go and see what we're doing moment. We've got you covered. So for our customers using Advanced Insights, we do report on this stuff already, which is really cool. So in Advanced Insights, and if you haven't seen Advanced Insights yet, go to our website. The URL is there. Under the software node, we do list browser extensions. So we're looking at Edge, Opera, Brave, Firefox, Chrome, the most popular ones. And we're listing out here the extensions we've found and where we've found them. installation dates and cool stuff like that. When you click on a particular extension, as with all Advanced Insights dashboards, it drills in. So here's me drilling into a specific device. So now I can look at all the information about this device, software compliance, hardware, everything. Advanced Insights is amazing. And I can see all the extensions for this specific device. Preempting a question that's going to come up in the chat, and if it hasn't already, I'd be surprised. This browser extension reporting is coming to Advanced Insights for Intune 2. So if you're excited about that product launch, and we're talking about it a lot at the moment, all the cool reporting stuff we're doing for our configuration manager customers, we want to do that for our Intune customers too. So it's really exciting to see that development happening as well. Yeah, and so that's my scare moment over. That's browser extensions. Hopefully that was interesting. Hopefully it sparked a few people to run off to Intune now and have a look at their configurations and think, man, what am I doing? Were there any non-complex questions in chat for browser extensions that we should cover, team?
They want to know if you can cover all that with DuckDuckGo, please. That'd be great.
Is that a browser or a search engine? I'm getting old now. I can't keep up.
I think it's kind of both, isn't it? I know it's primarily a search engine.
So
yeah, so one of the questions in the Q&A, Ben, for you would be, what is the best way to monitor all extensions installed in your environment? Which is, I think, what you just covered with Advanced Insights. But what would be your preferred way?
Patch My PC, Advanced Insights.
Yeah,
it's just easy. Like there's tools that do it. I mean, you can use scripts. So if you don't have a TVM solution, I'd obviously suggest Advanced Insights because it's just so simple. But you can use scripts to do inventories on devices, and you can use a proactive remediation to send it up to log analytics, and then from log analytics you can maybe have a run book that puts it into a nice dashboard. You can do all that stuff if you want. There's ways of getting the information. The critical thing really is you need to understand the risk of an extension to your organization. Yeah, so I've given you some tidbits of information to find the risks, the host permissions and the API permissions. It's really up to you to decide whether you accept that risk or not. And just understand that an extension you trust today could be compromised. They have been compromised in the past with supply chain attacks. Extensions get sold, so you can't trust it based on who created it. And it's just that whole security story, isn't it? Security is based on trust, and you have to weigh up productivity versus security, and that's never an easy thing to get right. But there's some really easy wins for you to do just using some simple Intune policy.
Join over 8,000 organizations that trust Patch My PC to keep 25 million devices up to date. It's secure, automatic, and built to scale. See for yourself. Click the link to book a live demo with a Patch My PC engineer now.